La Lune est un roman, the moon is a novel, is this wonderful, rich, mesmerizing portrait of the many faceted aspects of the moon. So Fatoumata, you write about the moon's origins, you write about what it's made of, you write about its position in the sky, its relationship to the earth. And you also, in so doing, you tell us about the history of humans and how humans have related to the moon, looked at it, seen it, measured it, and perhaps even sought to conquer it or grasp it. And so it's part scientific treatise, it's part personal essay, it's part poetry, and it's ultimately a story about the story of the moon. And it's brilliant.
Thank you.
And we're going to start with a really simple question. The title. What do you mean when you say that the moon is a novel? What does that term mean to you?
In fact, there are so many things to be said about the moon, like scientific aspects, its motion around the Earth, but it's not only that, because like centuries ago, the moon was the natural light for people by night, and so it had a lot of impacts on people's beliefs and also how they lived by night. So that's why I was like, I cannot only focus on scientific, science about them.
And so do you feel like you were responding to the scientific approach to the moon and trying to show that there was another way of understanding or relating to it?
Yeah, and that there are much more things to be known about space. And also maybe the thing is that now we are not used to see a starry sky. And now we can, most of us can see the moon, fortunately. So I'm like, at least let's try to know as much as we can the moon and how it has maybe also inspired many ethnies in the world, like many civilizations.
So you say that we can no longer see the starry sky now because of light pollution.
Light pollution, satellite pollution,
What do you
air
think?
pollution.
What do you think we as a people have lost because we can't see those stars anymore?
So many scientists have shown that we are made of stardust. So that's why I'm like, a part of our heritage come from space, and that we are losing a part of what we are.
When you say that we're made from stardust, you have to tell us more. You have to explain that a bit more.
So, for example, there are some elements that come from the explosion of some specific stars that we can find in our bodies. So, and also, the Big Bang, which was like the beginning of the universe, and where you had a lot of hydrogen and helium, and we can find these elements within our bodies.
So the makeup of, the stars, the planets around us is the same as the makeup of our own bodies.
Not planets, but mainly stars.
Stars. Yeah. Thank you. Stars.
Dying stars.
Dying stars.
But that's okay.
Well, they're living on in us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So they're not totally dead.
Yeah. And like in the 90s, there was a big earthquake in Los Angeles, and so many. It was like a disaster, and I think, the lights. There were no lights, no electricity, and all of a sudden, people started to see things in the sky. And what they did, they called the 911. Is it the same in Los Angeles? Telling the police that there's something in the sky, please come, blah, blah, blah. And in fact, it was the stars. And because people because in fact, if there was no pollution, we could see maybe 3,000 stars. Just can you imagine, like in Paris, you can see like maybe a dozen. And from a dozen, you go to 3,000. Even me, I will be like, oh my God, what's happening? So that's why I'm like, what happened in the 90s is going to happen here if one day we have such a disaster.
It's truly unthinkable, the thought of that many stars in the sky. It's a different way of seeing the cosmos around us.
Exactly.
For the present day, we can't picture it. I can't picture it in my head. And you write, connaître son passé, ses origines, sa culture, c'est d'abord savoir observer et contempler le ciel. So knowing one's origins and one's past is first knowing how to observe and contemplate the sky.
Exactly, and this is what astronomers are doing, is studying celestial objects to understand why we are here.
And so what I was struck by in this book as well is you're talking about the many meanings that the moon has acquired across history, and you highlight its sort of ambivalence, the fact that it's come to mean so many different things. So at the same time, it's the source of light, but it's associated with darkness. It's a source of serenity, and yet there's this idea of lunacy, madness. How do you contend with these different, well, first, which different significations, meanings of the moon did you uncover while writing this book? And how do you contend with this variety, this diversity?
Yeah, so the the full cycle of the moon is around 29 days to 30 days. So for human beings, it was kind of easy to calculate the time by looking at the moon by night. But the sun is like 365.25 days, which is a lot. So that's why one of the meaning of moon is to measure.
And you talk about this too with the history of the word. A lot of this book, it's wonderful. She talks about the naming of the moon and the different names that we've attached to it. And so you trace the name of the moon back to this practice of measuring, and you identify this word in an Indo-European dialect language called
Exactly.
me. Can you tell us about this word?
Yeah, so mensis, mensis, I mean, you can find the word mois, months, and it was this idea, this first idea that we are using the moon to know which day we are in the year.
And what other meanings does this word have? So we're tracing the word moon back to the Latin word mensis, which means measurement.
Yeah.
And then mensis can be traced even further back.
Exactly, because I mean, a bit of misogyny. So in fact, at some point, the moon was seen as, I mean, because moon was seen as having a passive action in space.
Passive, yeah.
Because it was only reflecting the light from the sun. So for people, I mean, for some people, it reminded them of women. So that's how the name moon became a feminine name. And that's why you have a menstru in French, menstru for the periods of women.
Like menstruation.
It comes from there also. Yeah.
And the word that it traces back to ultimately means light and briller, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so the origin of the way we name the moon is through light. And then this word takes on the meaning of measurement as well.
Exactly.
We arrive at the moon now. I want to talk more, before we get more into language, which we will do, I want to talk about the project of writing this book. So you write in your introduction, j'ai tenté de vulgariser du mieux que j'ai pu des sujets souvent très complexes et d'y trouver des ébauches et d'éclaircissements ou d'explications. So when you say you want to vulgariser this sort of scientific world that you're living in, what do you mean by that? What were you trying to do by writing about the moon from this perspective?
I mean, for me, I mean, we should have like a basic knowledge of the moon, and that was my goal. It's like at least people understand what's happening, and also because I think we've seen some fake news about the moon. We've seen some people looking at a solar eclipse without the proper
Sunglasses, protection, yes.
Like a former US president.
Who could it be? We won't say his name in this room. We'll keep it to ourselves.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to come in here.
Okay,
But
and that's why I was like, I mean, and I think there are so many things to be done to fight against also conspiracy theories, because you know that the conspiracy of a flat Earth is like increasing.
The flat Earth conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Interesting. I thought we'd stamped that one out, but
No. And yeah, and even you can see also fake images of astronomy on Twitter, I mean, on social networks. And there's a study that has said that most of the young people, they do their research not on Google, but on TikTok.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm like, I mean, there are some works to be done to be sure that.
And so your project is a sort of public information campaign.
Yeah, at my level.
Yes. What do you mean by that?
Like, this is what I can do from my perspective. Like, I cannot replace the French government, for example.
No.
Yeah, no, yeah, because
not today, maybe tomorrow.
Yeah, because I'm not sure I want to, but
that's for a different conversation.
Exactly. But for example, for me, I think that we should have like a scientific TV show
Mm.
on French channels
Mm.
because we don't have that from
Really?
now.
That
Yeah,
doesn't exist.
not anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think that's awful because it means that if you want to to watch a scientific TV show, you have to look it by yourself, or
Mm.
you have to, or maybe your parents will do their best to help
Mm.
you, but
And what impact does that have on science, on young people who want to become scientists when it's not readily accessible to them?
well, they don't know that it exists
Mm.
at first, and also they maybe have like some prejudices on some jobs,
Mm.
like it's too far from us, it's not for us.
Mm. Mm. This might be a good moment to talk more about how you arrived at the moon and at astronomy in general, because this wasn't something that was given to you freely either. So where did your interest in the subject of the moon come from?
So I'm interested by everything in astronomy. So I'm trying to calm down myself, like,
You have to be selective. You can do
yeah,
the moon, but you can't do Saturn and Mars, maybe.
yeah, maybe you have seen the images from the James Webb Space Telescope. The James Webb, no, yeah.
Okay.
And I was
audio
like,
file.
oh, I want to work on that. Oh my God, oh,
I'll just take it all, please.
yeah,
Thank you very
yeah.
much.
And I'm like, I know I cannot, but I'm like, let's try.
Might as well try, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
so yeah, and again, because even for me, I mean, I used to live in Wasilsek,
Mm.
and the sky, I mean, by night it's the moon. So that's why I was focused on the moon.
Mm. And was it challenging for you to enter into astronomy and become an astronomer?
To get the information on how to become, yes.
Really?
But yeah, but fortunately for me, I mean, I just had to cross the road, I mean, the street to go to the public library.
Mm.
So
We love libraries. Libraries are great.
I'm
We're big fans of libraries around here. So we're going to talk more about this tension between public knowledge, private knowledge, the way that scientific knowledge is made accessible and the ways that it's not made accessible. But I also want us to talk about what exactly scientific knowledge is, because something that's so fascinating in this book is the way that it reveals very slowly and carefully how little we know about the moon and about space. So we know a great deal, but this knowledge isn't stable. And it's subject to change as technology changes and as new methods of doing science take place. And one example of this is our understanding of how the moon was formed. So in the book, you talk about 3 hypotheses about the formation of the moon, and then you also talk about certain mythologies or certain legends about the formation of the moon. Can you talk about these different approaches to how the moon was born, as you said, la naissance de la lune?
the thing that without going too deep, the thing is that at that time where these theories were made, we didn't have any moon rocks to study. So it was kind of the imagination of scientists on how the moon was formed. So we had to wait for the moon rocks brought back by the Apollo missions to define the big lines on how the moon was formed. Because even today, there are some things we don't understand about the moon.
Like what?
Like the composition of the rocks.
So tell us more about these moon rocks for those who haven't read the book. Why were they important for discovering the formation of the moon, and what do we still not understand about them?
Yeah, so with the Apollo missions, so NASA has brought back like 380 kilos of moon rocks, and some of them have been studied. Some of them were not touched because NASA said at that time, I mean, in the 70s, that we don't have the technologies on how to properly study these rocks. So let's keep it for the next generation of scientists. And for the few that we have studied, we have, I mean, the idea is that so the Earth was in formation, and at some point it has been, I mean, it collided with another planet which had the size of Mars, named Theia. And while the Earth was partially destroyed by this collision, Theia was fully destroyed. And the rocks, I mean, the debris coming from the Earth and the rocks coming from Theia mixed together, and with time, it has formed the moon. And so when the moon was formed, it was like at maybe 20,000 kilometers away from Earth. while today is like at the mean distance between the Earth and the Moon is like 380,000 kilometers. Yeah.
And so we learned that through the Apollo mission, which brought back
Yeah.
the rocks to Earth.
Yeah. So this theory of the big impact was made in 1984.
And several millennia, several centuries before that, there was a different theory of the formation of the moon, which you talk about, which is a theory, a hypothesis, a legend shared by Mayan, Aztec, and Inca cultures. Could you tell us about this approach to the moon and the moon's origins?
Not scientific at all.
But I want to know how we define scientific here.
Yeah. So there was a time on Earth where there was no light. And the gods in the Aztec mythology had a meeting and said, we have to create light. And for that, they say we have to sacrifice two of us. And so one god said, I'm okay for that. And one was forced to sacrifice himself. And so before the day of the sacrifice, the god who was volunteer made a lot of donations and was kind of like, how can I say, outspoken, like
He's very confident,
yeah,
very certain that he was
exactly.
going to win.
While the other was poor and was doing small donations and was like, I have no choice. And so the big day arrives, and in fact, they had to throw themselves into like an ocean of fire. And so when the first god saw this ocean of fire, he was reluctant, was like, finally. And while he was like in his mind, the other one decided to jump. And he jumped, and then the sun raised from the ocean of fire.
So he beat him to it.
What?
He beat him to it. He was the one to jump in.
Yeah.
While the other one kind of
Yeah,
chickened
he
out.
was
So
sick. Yeah,
yes, he was frightened. Yeah, yeah.
And so when the first god saw that his companion became the sun, he decided to go, and then he threw himself into the ocean of fire, and then you had a second sun. And the other gods, they saw what happened, and they were like, "That's not fair," because the first one was full of courage, while the other waited for the other one to jump. And so one of the gods took a rabbit and threw it at the confident god, and it's like that this god from sun, he became the moon. Not scientific at all.
But what do you mean when you say that? How are you defining a scientific approach versus a non-scientific or mythological one? Is it based on empirical evidence, based on a specific method?
Yeah. I mean, study the rocks, study the motion of the moon.
Yeah.
I mean, here it's
lovely. It's poetry.
Yeah,
yes.
It's lovely.
And yet it still serves a purpose, right? There's a reason that you included that in your book.
Yeah, because I wanted to show people how civilizations without any technical tools try to understand why there's the moon, why there's the sun.
And this reveals to us that this has been a question that we've all asked ourselves from the beginning of time, essentially.
Exactly.
It reminds me of something you wrote in the beginning of your book, if I can find the quote. I don't think I have it anymore, but it's about how from the beginning of time, if you look at the earliest caves of prehistoric caves, or there's cave art, you see illustrations that have to do with the movements of the moon. And so
yeah, because it's so obvious to everyone. I mean, you see that the moon, its phase changes days and night after night. And many civilizations have led proof that they have observed the moon.
And so don't you think it's interesting that the moon is so immediately visible to us and obvious to us? It's obvious that it changes. And yet at the same time, it's so technologically or technically complex, scientifically complex, and so hard to access.
Exactly.
From a general popular standpoint.
I mean, there are some points that are complex to understand, but there are some others that are quite simple.
I want to talk more. We've brought myth and knowledge into it, and the sort of central tension between systems of knowledge, basically ways of knowing, whether you know through religion, through legend, or whether you know through the scientific method. And I think that this brings us to the question of the formation of knowledge and the relationship between knowledge and power. So for the example of the Aztec approach to the moon, that's a knowledge system or an approach to the moon that has largely been forgotten by the so-called, Western European world due to colonialism and due to the colonial violence that was wrought upon that people. So how has colonialism influenced our understanding of the moon and the way that we relate to it?
The thing is that when you look at how discoveries are introduced, you won't see many names coming from outside of the Western world. Mm-hmm. And the thing, it's my personal point of view, is that we didn't even have departments, even researchers that have worked on finding what we call the cosmogony of the civilization.
What is that?
Cosmogony is like how cosmos was seen and studied by people, by civilizations, by ethnies.
And would you say that that's the work that you're doing?
I did not do that a lot on this book. It's because now you have a new, it's what we call archaeoastronomy. It's like looking for ancient astronomy outside of the Western world. Because we know that there are some civilizations, even if it was colonized, or we may find some proof that they had some activities or knowledge related to astronomy.
Can you think of more examples of this?
Maybe there's, Stonehenge in the UK?
Stonehenge, yes.
Yeah, so in fact, the most ancient Stonehenge-like structure is in Egypt. It's called Nabta Playa. And I forgot when it was found, but just to know that it existed in Egypt and that people knew how to calculate time and know what season they will be is interesting, and in this particular place. And you also have like the tablet from Babylon, where you could see the lunar calendar. There are so many things to be known, and but we don't know yet.
And this is a field that's developing right now, archaeoastronomy,
Yes.
excuse me.
Yes.
Yes. And so do you see yourself working in this field?
I do it a bit, but it's a lot of work because I'm originally from Mali, and maybe Timbuktu, and we have the Timbuktu manuscripts, and in some of them, on some of the papers that have been saved because it has been destroyed by with time, and also because we had terrorism in Mali. You can see on some papers things related to astronomy and how they used to calculate time. So
I want to talk more about what you mentioned about you see a particular type of name attached to scientific discoveries, and it's typically a European or Western name, because I think the way that even the Earth or the moon itself was named is really fascinating. In your book, you talk about the different regions of the moon and how we mapped it out and kind of made it into a geographic terrain, which is an inherently political act because you have to be in a position of international power to decide what the moon looks like.
Yeah, and even the celestial objects. Jupiter, Mars.
Yes.
So yeah, it comes from the same place.
Yeah. And I want to talk about one specific example of the intersection of politics and the moon, which receives quite a lot of attention in the last chapter of your book. And this is the moment that the moon really entered the stage as an object of modern political combat, etc. This is, of course, the famous space race. Can you tell us about how the moon became this political battleground of the Cold War?
Yeah, the thing is that the Cold War was in every domain's sectors. And at some point, space became one field where the US and Soviet Union were going to fight. And what happened in 1961, 59.
Mhm.
1959, the Soviet Union, had sent for the first time in human history an artificial object, the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1.
Mhm.
And so in the US, people were crazy, like there's an object in space, flying.
How did this get up there? Why haven't we sent an object into space?
Yeah, what is going to do to us and
Yeah.
many things. And at that time, there was a lot of propaganda.
Mhm.
And since the US lost this how can I say, not competition, but this battle.
Yes, this
They-
first step. Yes.
Yeah, they had to find something else to win in space.
Mhm.
And then the Soviet Union won again by sending the first man into space,
Mhm.
Yuri Gagarin, in 1961. Then they won again by sending the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova. It was in 1963 or 65, knowing that for the US took a long time. It was studied right in 1984, I think. And so JFK said, we choose to go on the moon.
Yeah.
And what I liked in his statement at that time is that he said, we're going to send people on the moon, and we're going to bring them back safely to Earth.
And why was that a difference from what was happening, for example, with the USSR?
Not with the USSR, but with, because in fact, a few years ago, there was a project named maybe Mars One, which goal was to send humans to Mars, just to send.
That's it. Just send them up there and say, bon voyage.
Yeah,
good
like,
luck.
I'm the first.
Have a nice life.
And then you die.
Wow.
Yeah. And
that was a real project.
Yes.
Wow.
We have raised money. We had a lot of, a lot of people applied.
People applied to be sent off to Mars to die.
Yeah. For them, it was not to die, but
not to come back.
Yeah.
It sounds
I know.
though.
Yeah, I've seen a documentary about that, and I remember it was a man from Germany. He has kids and everything, and he was like, "I'm going to Mars if I'm selected." And I was like, And for me, it's not. We should not. This kind of project should not exist because
Why?
technology is. Technology and scientific achievements is not to send people to die just to achieve something like, oh, we have sent humans to Mars.
Check it off the list.
Exactly.
Move on.
Yeah.
So what do you think the point of scientific progress is then when we study the moon?
It's so it's for me what we call, like we said, that it's fundamental science in the sense that we are not looking to generate money with that knowledge. We just want to understand. So we want to understand why the moon is here, how it was formed, and maybe how the Earth was formed, how the Earth was billion years ago, and also how the solar system is formed. How come we have life on Earth? Because we know that the moon has an impact on Earth. Many questions.
It's interesting though, because that is still the possibility of obtaining that knowledge is still so caught up in politics, right? You look at what we know about how the moon was formed with the rocks. It seems to me that the primary objective of sending people to the moon was not to bring back moon rocks.
No.
It was to land on the moon.
Exactly. Not to win over the USSR.
Yeah,
first.
exactly. It was a propaganda tool, right? It was to establish.
Exactly. Yeah, and to win. Like it was the final battle. Like who's going first on the moon? And because I forgot when was announced the mission to the moon, but it took years before the politicians were like, if we're going to the moon, we should do some science.
Maybe we should do some science. Maybe we should learn some things.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I forgot we could do that up there.
Yeah, and that's why it was established the Lunar Planetary Institute in Houston. So it was like the entity in charge of the scientific aspects of the missions to the moon.
And something that you pointed out to me earlier that I hadn't even really thought about was that the political terrain of America was so fraught at the time that they were sending people to the moon. And this wasn't necessarily a cheap project.
No, it was billions of dollars.
It was,
Yeah.
billions of dollars,
Yeah,
right?
and over the 10 years that it took to do the Apollo 11 mission, it was like at least, almost, 400,000 people that worked
Wow.
on these missions.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this was while, the civil rights movement was happening in America.
Yeah, in parallel.
There was, the constant threat of global nuclear disaster. Was there pushback to this project to go to the moon, or were people generally supportive of it?
I don't even know if you had the choice
Mm.
because there were some a lot of people protested against the moon missions, even Martin Luther King. So, but it didn't change.
Well, something else that's interesting about the moon and propaganda and politics is the profile of the people that were sent to the moon. So you write, you describe the certain profile that they had to fit in order to be candidates to go on the moon. So they had to be men, obviously. They had to be between 25 and 40 years of age, less than 1.8 meters in height. They had to weigh less than 80 kilos. They had to have a university degree. And at the end, you point out that all 7 people who ended up in space were white, male, Protestant, married, from the Middle West, and raised from the Midwest, and raised by authoritarian father figures.
Yeah.
Now, it goes without saying that neither of us would fit that criteria. Is this still a problem in astronomy today, in astrophysics today? This lack of diversity, this, the constant Protestant white man who's always there getting in the spaceship?
It has changed, fortunately. The thing is that in fact, you have if you want to be eligible to apply to become an astronaut, you must be like a pilot or an engineer or a scientist or a doctor. Then, for Europe, you must have at least 3 years of professional experience, speak English, a second another language, and just to check all of these requirements, there's already
so many barriers in place.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but for the Artemis mission, maybe you have seen that it's half women, half men. So it's kind of okay, but it's changing slowly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because even for Europe, we have now maybe 5 women astronauts. But again, 6 months ago, we had only 2 women astronauts. One was retired.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what's the state of the field with astronauts today? Are we still sending people into space? Is there public support for that? Is there a possibility that becomes a real sector, or a real important feature of the scientific sector?
So, there's the ISS, the International Space Station, at 400 kilometers in altitude, and you have a permanent stay of people out there. The thing
Just
is
living in space.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and the duration of mission is 6 months, but some people have done almost 1 year, to see how space was impacted the human body.
What did they find?
But space, we know that space is a hostile place for human, and we know that it can, the cosmic rays, the rays, they can break the DNA.
Oh.
Yeah.
Not
and
great.
we know that you have to do a lot of sports each day in space, because since you don't have any more gravity, you don't have gravity, your body is osteoporosis. Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah. So that's why when I heard that we're going to Mars, I'm like,
good luck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bon voyage.
Let's try the moon.
Yeah.
The moon, which is 3 days away from us. And also because there's one aspect that we don't know. If we want to go to Mars, it's going to take 8 months to go, 6 months to stay, 8 months to come back. So it's almost 2 years.
And has that ever been done before, 2 years of humans in space?
No, but even, we don't know how the mental health will be.
How the
mental health of people.
Oh, the mental health, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
we don't know.
Yes.
and you're going to be with people who don't have the same culture as you, maybe they don't speak maybe the same language as you, and it's going to be a tiny space, so there's no way you're going to say, I'm going in my room. No, it's going to be
That's a long time to live with roommates you might not like.
Exactly, yeah, and there's no way that you're going to say, I want to go back to Earth.
Yes.
No.
I changed my mind. Turn around. Take me back.
There's no way. So that's why, even if we have a technology,
should we do it is the question.
No, the human being is going to be the biggest challenge, threat to the success of this mission.
That's so interesting. So if we had the technology, if we had the science, if we had the machines, the human brain is what's gonna
and
what's
also
gonna stop all.
These people won't see the Earth. They won't see their planet. How is it going to impact them?
So you don't want to go to Mars?
No, moon is perfect.
You want to go to the
3 days?
moon? It's just like a long holiday. It's
exactly.
long weekend.
Exactly.
And so, do you think people are heading back to the moon? What would it have to take, in terms of political stability, public opinion right now, to begin sending people to the moon again?
So maybe we should ask first to American people, how do you feel about the Artemis missions? I mean,
it's a good question.
Yeah, because it comes, we had a pandemic situation, economic crisis. I don't know how people are seeing this mission. And also, we can talk about the tragic death of George Floyd. It was in 2020, no? And during people were in the street protesting. Yeah. In the same period, you had the first flight, the first launch from the US to go to the ISS. Wow. And I was like, people are kind of fighting for civil rights, maybe for
the right to live. Yeah.
The right to live.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you have people going to space. Because in fact, the US, for maybe more than 10 years, they did not launch any humans from the US soil because of the Columbia disaster that took place in 2003. They stopped the shuttle. Thank you. And so it took a lot of time for the US to have a company developed for them a way to go to space. So the US were relying on Russia. And finally, they made it in 2020, and it was during the George Floyd event. And I was like, it's just kind of the same of what happened in 1969. 1 year before, you had the death of Martin Luther King. You had still people fighting for the civil rights, and you had Apollo 11 mission. And I was like, as a Black person, how did they feel to see that? People celebrating, oh, we are on the moon, while you don't maybe have access to the basic rights.
I mean, there's something so dystopian about the idea that there's people fighting for the right to live and to breathe on the earth, on the planet that we live on. At the same time, they're shipping people to another planet where they're, it's costing billions of dollars. They're deliberately deprived of oxygen when they're up there. Like, just the dissonance there.
And even now you have Blue Origin, the company of Jeff Bezos. So in fact, so we can go to space for a few minutes. I mean, it takes like a few hours to go there. I mean, the whole process takes a few hours, but you are in space for a few minutes. One ticket is above 1 million, and it's more than 1 million. And at that time, so I was in Texas. So the launch pad is in Van Horn, and I was living in Marfa, like 2 hours drive from there. And at the same time in Marfa, so I was told by the people that a few months before, during the pandemic situation, when you had people doing the line to get some food because they lost their jobs. And in parallel, you had the Blue Origin flights. And even me, I want to go to space, but I was like,
like that, not at that cost.
Yeah, but even
That's unbelievable.
yeah.
And what do you think you as astrophysicists or we as people can do to fight against that, to make sure that science remains accessible and for the public, as opposed to this just crazy billionaires project that coexists with people dying of hunger?
Yeah, but for me, it's to the government to do something, because I mean, I cannot decide to establish the legal frame. In fact, because even a few days ago, SpaceX, they have launched their Starship, and it has polluted the area around the launch pad.
It's just
I'm not
totally
surprised.
antithetical.
I'm not surprised, but I'm like, again.
It so perfectly sums up everything that's wrong with that situation.
And they have the agreement from the FAA.
Wow.
So I'm like, what can we do as civilians? I mean, for me, it's a failure, like from the government. We have to protect the assets on Earth in space.
We are going to switch. We're going to open up to audience questions now because time is rapidly running out on the subject of kind of what can be done and how we can keep science open and accessible to the public. I do want to quickly ask you about your organization, Ephemerid. Could you tell us what this is and how it started?
Yeah, so in fact, when I was a kid, I did not have access to to activities related to astronomy and space. And so when I had the means, I decided to found an association that will go to the people, to the areas where I used to live, and to bring them astronomy and space. So it means activities where kids will learn to do their own solar system. It's to bring also some experts in space sector and astronomy to learn about what's happening in space.
I think it's just nice for us all to know that we have Jeff Bezos in the world, but we also have people like you in the world who are trying to to bring science to the people instead of taking it away from them.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Can we have a big round of applause, please?
Okay.
We've got time for questions in the audience. I already see hands going up, which I'm glad to see. So Alfonso will bring you a microphone.
Thank you for the fascinating conversation. My question, in how many years from now do you think humans will have the capability so as to create micro villages or some kind of micro settlement on the moon, like there exist similar settlement in Antarctica? So do you think in next 10, 15, 20 years, it's going to be a feasible thing or not? I'm asking this question out of fascination, and also because last year I went to Viva Tech conference, which is about startup in Paris. And over there, I came across a startup which is building iPods, which has independent ecosystem. It's called something like Interstellar Lab.
Yes.
So that's my question. Thank you.
So I will say that I don't know, because for me, everything is unstable. So now there are the missions, Artemis, to go back on the moon. Should I say like American going back on the moon? Because it was the primary message, but now we have a Canadian in the first team.
Amazing. Diversity.
Yeah. And the thing is that, so there's the US presidential elections next year. And for me, if the president is not the same, the timeline of the Artemis missions may change. Because it was Obama who canceled like the missions to the moon. I think it was maybe 2010, something 29, yeah, something like that. And it's the President Trump who then brought back this thing to, I mean, he said America is going back on the moon. So now we have Joe Biden, who is on the same path. But if the next US president has not the same thought, it may be changed. Yeah. And let's not forget that China is doing a lot. So maybe China may surprise us because we don't share that much information on what they are doing, how they are doing it. So maybe like tomorrow we'll see the first Chinese on the moon. We don't know. Yeah, because they have their own Chinese space station. They have done many things, and we don't know. And we know that NASA cannot work with the Chinese Space Agency because of some specific laws. Yeah, there's something in the US laws that forbid NASA to work with China. Yeah. So maybe we can have a surprise. But it can happen maybe in less than 10 years for the moon villages. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for your insights and conversation. I was wondering what mystery particularly fascinates you about the moon that you would want to have answered in your lifetime?
I want to know everything. I want to, I mean, there are so many things I want to understand. Yeah. Maybe I would like to know how water was formed on the moon, because there's water on the moon. And since for astrobiologists, when they say that there's life somewhere, it means that there is water in this place, which is like a human-centered like hypothesis. So I would like to know how come you have water. Maybe this one. Welcome.
Other questions in the room? We have a question on Zoom.
This question kind of goes back to your topic of mythology that you were speaking about before. The question is, can you talk about the value of myth in understanding the science behind astronomy? I use myth to talk about the environment and Mother Earth's determination to keep homeostasis. My argument is that the ancient peoples were in relationship with nature. We are not in such relationships today.
And it's true because the moon was, I mean, why we needed to know what time it was mainly for the agricultural activities. So the link, I mean, it's one of our primary needs, it's to eat. And so that's why people had a strong connection with the moon. And when some civilizations went further into understanding things about the moon and space in general. And yeah, and I would say that there are some civilizations, they use images and symbols to try to understand how the moon is working.
Like what?
Like, for example, the duration of an eclipse. So in fact, even if it seems obvious, to see how it was described in some stories, you are like, that's a good thought. That's a good way to bring it to people.
Do you have an example of one of those stories?
Yes, it's like in Hinduism. So again, so there was a time where you had gods and demons, and they were mortals, so they could die, and they were looking for the elixir to become immortal. And so they worked together, and at some point, they find how to do this elixir. And so once it was ready, in fact, the gods were like, we're not going to share.
Ours.
Yes, we're going to give like a fake elixir to the demons. But the thing is that there's one demon who heard what they said. So he groomed himself and went on the line for the gods to take the elixir of immortality. And while he was going to have his spoon of elixir, the god of moon and god of sun saw him and say, "Hey, that's a demon. Don't give it to him." And it was too late because he had time to just
swallow it.
Yeah, just a bit. Yeah. But at the same time, while he was swallowing it, one god cut his head, and he sent his head in this part of space and his body in another part of space, and this god became immortal. and each time he's trying to get revenge on the moon, I mean, on the gods of moon and sun. And so what he does is that they said that in this story that when there's an eclipse, it's because this god, this demon, is eating the moon and the sun by revenge. But since he doesn't have a body anymore, it doesn't last that much time. Yeah. I think it's beautiful. I mean, yeah,
It's lovely. It's a beautiful story.
yeah,
And it helps us understand something that we're seeing in the sky, something scientific.
exactly.
Mm.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a part in your book where you write about sympathy as a way of understanding gravitational and centrifugal force, and the fact that we can use these very poetic, simple terms to describe scientific processes that are in fact very complex.
Exactly.
It's a sort of pedagogical tool.
Yeah.
It's great. Yes.
Have you done any research regarding to menstruation and the moon? Because it's like the same, how do you say that in English? Cycle.
So I did not, but in fact, when I was working at Paris Observatory, one of my colleagues was in charge to answer to the questions of a general public. And he had the question of, I mean, there are more than 60% of water in our body. Since we have a tide because of the moon, maybe it's the same thing between the moon and us. And his answer was, if you take a glass of water and you put it outside, even if it's like the full moon or first crescent, nothing's going to happen. So yeah, so this is, and for the menstrual, I mean, the thing is that women don't have the same cycle. It doesn't start on the same day. So that's why for the scientific community, there's no link between of women. It's not exactly the same for all women.